And over the weekend, of course, we saw rallies in Algeria. Where will the next regime fall? Let's ask Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was a top State Department official during the George W. Bush administration. Dr. Haass, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you were in the State Department, where would you look next for the next potential domino to fall?
Well, in a funny sort of way, I'd continue to look in Cairo and I'd look in Egypt, because so much will depend upon what happens next in Egypt. If things go smoothly, if there's public order, if democracy or something like it seems to ultimately come about, then you'll have one set of effects. On the other hand, if things go off the rails, if there's violence, if the army stays in power and there's no political or economic improvement, you could have a totally different set of effects. If you remember the aftermath in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was ousted, it did not encourage democratic change around the Middle East, because people came to understand democracy as leading to chaos. So again, a lot of the answer to your question may very much depend upon what happens in Egypt.
Dr. Haass, this is Margaret Brennan in Cairo. We've seen political change, but I've got to tell you, on the streets of Cairo, there's not much economic change just yet. How much of time, really, does the military regime have before you see social unrest widespread once again? And does the international community need to help with the transition?
Well, you're exactly right. And the economic problems are severe. Indeed, the economic problems, I would suggest, are perhaps more acute right now, more pressing than the political problems. It'll be very hard for any government in Egypt to address those quickly. These are structural. You've got all these people who are formally educated but really aren't ready to do jobs. You've got virtually no foreign investment coming into Egypt right now. Tourism has been scared off. So perhaps the international community and several of Egypt's neighbors could help tide them over with some bridge financing to get them through this transitional period. But ultimately, you are going to need policies on the part of the new government, whoever or whatever it is, that's going to essentially generate economic activity, attract investment, produce jobs, and all the rest.
Well, if you were at state right now, I mean, what would you be advising? It seemed to be indicating that the leadership should come within the region and not from the West.
Well, I think the United States and the West can, if necessary, provide some loans. If the Egyptians do certain things, for example, I think investment will come from the private sector if things are calm. Once there is a new legitimate government, we could be talking about even some sort of a free trade agreement or some version of one. But the biggest help we could give right now is on creating a political environment that is conducive to economic growth. And that would be such things as constitutional reform, political reform. I think the Egyptians could use some advice essentially on how to make an orderly political transition. I know people in the square on Friday were jubilant, but as you already see, that positive mood will turn sour, potentially very quickly, if people don't see a degree of political reform and they don't see a degree of economic improvement. So the biggest thing I believe the United States could do is to help with the political process, because if the politics are ultimately right, the economics will follow. But if the politics go off the rails, if there's violence, if people are spending their time in Tahrir Square rather than in their offices or in their schools, it will be very bad for Egypt.
Dr. Haass, I know that you were in Davos in January meeting with business leaders and politicians, and you said that Egypt did not really come up as a matter of discussion among the people there, and we know what happened since then. What do you think now is not being discussed that could surprise the world at large again?
In terms of Egypt, I think too much of the world thinks that the fact that Mubarak has left is decisive. And I simply think it's the end, if you will, of the beginning. And the most difficult parts of the revolution always come, history tells us this, after you've ousted the so-called ancien regime, the former rulers. So I think the world is breathing a sigh of relief when, in fact, their reaction should be just the opposite. They should now think about, coming back to our previous conversation, what needs to be done by Egyptians, what the outside world could do. But then also, given your earlier questions, obviously we need to look at the rest of the region. And I would obviously be concerned about places like Jordan, like Algeria, like Yemen. I'm not as concerned about the traditional monarchies, say like Saudi Arabia or Morocco. But we have to really watch almost all the countries, particularly those with large urban populations. I think those might be the most vulnerable.
Dr. Haass, it's Margaret Brennan. I'm just seeing now that military council members here in Egypt told Google executive Wael Ghonim, who's a representative of the opposition, that constitution referendum will happen within 2 months' time. Is that soon enough?
Well, that's awfully soon from where I sit. To think about constitutional change that quickly in 2 months is pretty ambitious. I would say it's more important to get these things right than to get them done fast. And in the case of the Constitution, you've really got to set something up that creates, to use an American phrase, a system of checks and balances, which will help create competing centers of power in Egypt, which will encourage moderation and which will encourage compromise. You do not want to have a constitution in Egypt which would allow any single group or party to essentially dominate the politics or economics.
Right. Dr. Haass, thank you so much. Always interesting to hear your point of view. I appreciate the time.